Last month brought us April showers. And what do April showers bring? May flowers. Hi, and welcome back to Quilted from the Roots. My name is Chelsea Olson, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make this cute rose swirls block. This is the advanced block for the month of May for the Block of the Month program for the Tehachapi Mountain Quilters. So if you'd like to learn how to make this block, then please keep watching. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. I am actually not the creator of this technique. I came across this tutorial on YouTube by Eckmeier, and I'll make sure to link her original video tutorial above and put a link to her page in the description below. But she has this tutorial for the rose swirl block, and I changed the dimensions up a little bit, so it's not exactly the same as hers. However, it is such a cool technique that I just had to bring it and share it to you guys. So hopefully she won't mind me borrowing her idea, but it is super fun. Make sure to go check out her channel. And she has some other really cool techniques and books and patterns for sale. So go give her some love. And now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into what we're gonna need to make this block. So to begin, you're gonna need to pick out 4 fabrics from the same color family. I'm doing a purple block today, so I chose a light, 2 mediums, and a dark. This is pink, but pink is a light color of purple, so that's why I'm choosing this. You can see here, I've done this in red. Here's my dark, here's my light, here's my 2 mediums. Here's another pink one. Here's a pink one. This is kind of a purple, but purple is a dark pink. So that's how I chose my fabric there. Here's a yellow. Yellow for your dark, you might have to kind of go with a light orange, but it falls in that family. So you choose your fabric, and then when you get them picked, you're gonna cut 1 8.5-inch square from each fabric. So that's what I have here. Now we're gonna stack them in order from dark to light. And once you get them stacked, all right sides up, you're going to need to get a ruler and a marking pen of some kind. I'm using a friction pen today. You could use just a regular pencil or a water-soluble marker. Now here's a quick tip. If you are right-handed like me, when you're looking at this, I know this gets flipped around in the camera, so I'm not for sure how to look, but as you are staring at it, if you're right-handed, you're gonna start from the lower left corner. We are gonna mark our measurements from this corner out. If you are left-handed, when you are staring at your squares, you're gonna start from the lower right corner and mark these measurements out that direction. So like I said, I'm right-handed. I'm gonna start from this corner then, the lower left, and we are gonna measure at 1.5 inches. We'll make a little mark, 3 inches, 5 inches, and 7.5 inches. If you guys print out the pattern in the description below, this will have your measurements on them. So now we've done it on this side. Now we're gonna mark going up this side at 1.5. So the same measurements, 1.5, 3, 5, and 7.5. So once again, this one's a little different than Eckmeier's. This will finish at 6 inches. I believe her block finished at 4.5 inches, so that's why the measurements are a little different. We're actually making an additional cut as well. So now that we have these marked, this is the fun part. This whole block is free-formed piecing. So we're gonna cut this freeform, no rulers, nothing. Before you cut this though, I would recommend getting an old cutting mat or rotary mat, something that you don't use all the time. This is kind of a secondary mat for me. I bring it to retreats and things like that. I cut, for some reason, when I do curves, really hard. I don't know, like I feel like it doesn't cut as good. I don't know. Anyway, for some reason, I cut really deep, and on my other mat, I left a pretty big groove into it. That's, I mean, it's supposed to be self-healing, but you can still see it. So definitely if you have a secondary mat or an old retired mat, then cut on there. But what you're gonna do is just cut from your 1.5 inch mark to your 1.5 inch mark, and you're gonna cut a gentle curve. I like to use a 45 millimeter for this. The 60, the bigger guy, he just doesn't do sharp curves as well. You could even use a 28 millimeter if you have it, but 45 works just fine. So you're gonna start from this 1.5 inch and go to this 1.5 inch and just cut a curve. You start where that mark is and just end where you made the mark. And if you don't hit it exactly, that's fine too. This is free form and you don't have to be precise with this. That's the fun part of it. If it doesn't cut all the way through like that, I apparently need to change my blade, then just go ahead and cut. If these aren't all lined up with the exact same angle, that's fine too. Okay, so now it's time to cut from our 3-inch mark to our other 3-inch mark. And I kind of just hold it behind so it doesn't wiggle so much. And then we cut that one, reline these up, cut from our 5 to our 5. And your curves may look a little different than mine. It doesn't really matter. This is pretty modern and nothing has to be precise. I think that's why I find this so freeing and fun. So you just cut and make all of your cuts. So you have 4 cuts in total, which gives you 5 pieces like this. These little guys like this, you're only gonna need 1. I choose to use the dark just because that's what Karen did and I like the way it looked. So these guys you can just set to the side. You're not gonna need them. You're only gonna need this dark piece here. And after you get these cut, you're gonna take this all over to the ironing board. I just bring the whole thing over and I'll show you why when we get over there. And another quick note before we go ahead and start pressing, Karen uses just steam iron. I am a klutz and I know that I will burn myself if I try to do this next step with steam. So I like to use my magic spray starch. If you have not seen the video on this, I will make sure to list it up above. I take a big I use distilled water in my iron. So when I empty one of these containers, I fill it halfway, half a gallon with another jar or another tub of distilled water, and which is 8 cups. And then I take 8 cups of regular vodka. I just buy a giant bottle of it at Costco or Sam's Club. At my Costco, I think I paid $13 for the giant bottle. And anyway, so I just fill this up full and I label it flatter spray and just refill a spray bottle as I need it. This sprayer, I've had a few questions, is from stylistsprayers.com. I will list this in the description below so you can find a link to go to their website. I bought it at a quilt show, so I'm not for sure how much it costs on their website, but you can go check them out. I love this sprayer. It does a nice mist. You just press this one time and it sprays for like 5 seconds. It's great. So now that we have this covered, let's go ahead and go over to the ironing board. So we're going to start by taking our pieces and we are going to turn under the concave sides. So these inside curves. We're going to start by flipping these upside down. I like to start with the dark and the largest piece just because the largest piece is the easiest. And while you're starting out, it just really helps to learn this technique. Like I said, Karen uses a steam iron, but I prefer to use just my dry iron, and then I'm going to press it with my magic spray starch when I get done. So you start by folding this over 1/4 inch and just, this is to the wrong side. This is a purple fabric, so you can't exactly see all solid, but it's going to the wrong side, and I'm just folding this over roughly 1/4 inch and following the curve and basically just pressing in my seam allowance. Now this kind of stands up. It doesn't lay flat. You can see this kind of pops up, and Karen's okay with that, but Karen is a pro at this. So I like to flip it over to this side, get this curve that I just pressed laying pretty flat. Give it a quick spray with my magic spray starch and press from the front side. Then this way, especially learning this technique, I think it helps a lot, and then you don't have to pin. If you give that a good press, you have a nice crisp edge. This lays super flat and it's going to make your piecing a little easier. So once you get this pressed, and this is why I like to start with the dark, because you're going to stack these in the order that we're going to piece them. So that way, while you're doing your piecing, you don't have to think about it. You just grab the piece that's on top and add it on. So by starting with the biggest piece and the darkest, I just set it over here and I start my stack. So we'll take our medium color here and we're gonna press. Oh, I like to do it from this side. I think you'll get in a rhythm what side's easier. I think it's easier for me to start from the right side for some reason. But you just fold it over 1/4 of an inch towards the back. And it doesn't have to be precise. If it's a little under, as long as it's at least 1/8 of an inch, you're going to be just fine. It's a little over, also no big deal. So you press that in just like that. And we're going to flip it over to the front, get it to lay flat here. Okay, now we'll give it a good spray with our magic spray starch. And now we'll lay nice and flat. Let it usually sit there for just a second before I pick it up, and then you can start on the next piece. So you just continue to do this with all your pieces. The smaller pieces get a little more challenging, but you're already gonna have done all the larger ones, so you should be pretty proficient at this by the time you get to the small ones. All right, so this is sat for a little bit. We'll move it and stack it up. And we'll press this one. The reason this works is this is a bias edge, so you can manipulate it and get it to fold the way you want it to fold. But sometimes it doesn't want to lay flat. So this pressing from the front, I think, really helps, especially when you're just starting out learning this technique. Once you get proficient at this and you've made a few, you may not need to do this step anymore, but it's just the way that I like to do it. And yeah, you just keep going. This is actually the purple color if you are buying a kit from me. You'll also have noticed, I'm sure, that this block is not a 12-inch finished block. This is a 6-inch finished block. So you are gonna, if this fold changes, it's not a big deal. It just, as long as you have some folded under, it's not the original crease, it doesn't matter. Just that you have enough folded under that it basically becomes your seam allowance. So just as long as you have at least 1/8 of an inch, you are going to be just fine. So sorry, what I was saying before is this finishes at 6 inches, not 12. So if you stick around to the end, I will show you, you can make 4 of these and put them together into a block. So if you're making a sampler quilt from all the blocks for the whole entire year, then that way, if you make 4 of these, you can sew them together and you'll have a 12-inch finished block to put in your sampler kit. Sampler quilt, sorry. So once again, we flip the pile over and we're doing the inside curves, the concave sides. So we'll start here. And I think you kind of get the idea. So I'm gonna speed this process up and put it on probably ×4 speed so that you're not bored to death. And you'll just see me stacking them here and ironing these folds in on all of the inner curves. if these are acting a little wonky, they don't want to lay flat, just give it a little press before you add your starch, because sometimes they wrinkle up a little bit when you spray them, so that'll help kind of keep it in place before you add your starch. Now that you're a little closer, zoomed in, maybe you can see a little better, just folding over the edges. These last ones are a little tricky. Like I said, they're really teeny tiny, so for me, for sure, I definitely would not be using steam on these. I know I'd burn myself. So see, this one doesn't want to really lay that flat. I just set the iron right on top of it, and then give it a spray and let it sit, and then just start stacking these up. And these are I still burn myself. These are a very sharp curve compared to the other ones. So these may not lay perfectly flat, but it's going to be fine. You don't need precision at all. So it's going to be really fun. You'll see when we put it together. And then I like to just let them sit there to cool off before I move them, so I don't burn myself like I just did a second ago, but also when it cools in place, this residual heat holds it in. That's why a clapper works. It holds the heat in. Where is my clapper? And it just really helps to set that curve, or if you're pressing flat, it just really helps to flatten a seam out really well. So that's why I like to let it cool down in place before I move it to my stack. It seems to help it lay more flat if I do it that way. Okay, last piece. Because see, this one, there is no inner curve. This is a convex curve, so no need to press this. So we just leave this one as is. So last piece, and if you bought a kit from me, you're gonna find that this whitest color, this pinkish fabric, does not want to cooperate very well. So just do your best with it. As soon as you flip it over, it wants to go do a different shape, but that's fine. Mine's ended up making its own little crease, and it ends up being larger, not smaller, so it's not going to be an issue. Just give it a good press. Let it sit for a second. And you can probably see there that ended up getting a little wider, but it's going to be just fine. So now that we have all of these nice and pressed and stacked up, ready to go, we'll carry this over to the sewing machine. That's why I like to use this mat, just to transport it back and forth. Okay, so now that all of your pieces are pressed, you're gonna take your stacks over to your sewing machine, and you're gonna start with this small little piece. You're gonna position it so that you have this arc in the upper right hand position. And then you're gonna take your smallest, lightest arch, and you're gonna overlap that by about 1/4 of an inch. Basically, you're gonna use your pressed in seam to overlap and make sure that you're going to overlap about 1/4 of an inch. And then that way you're basically creating your seam allowance. So not only are you looking for a 1/4 inch overlap, you're also wanting to kind of center this arch. So you don't want it right here. You're going to want to kind of center it evenly with that arch. And then when you get that positioned, you're going to want to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge. Now, with your thread choice, you can choose a pink, a purple. I'm just going to use this light gray. It almost looks like a white, just so you guys can see it. I think it'll show up a little better on camera, but you can try to blend it a little more if you'd like. This presser foot here, I'm just lining up the folded edge along the inside of this presser foot to know where to sew. And these first seams are the hardest because it is such a sharp curve, but it's still easy. The only thing that you're just gonna have to keep in mind is that you're gonna have to pivot a little bit. So you're gonna start off the edge and just go slow and keep your edge lined up with the inside of your presser foot or whatever mark you have for your 1/8 inch marking. I pivot with my needle down. I stop, lift up my presser foot and turn it where I need it to go. So a few more stitches. It looks like I'm getting away from a 1/4 inch. So I stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot a little bit, do a few more stitches, need to pivot again, stop and pivot, and continue off the edge. So it's going to look something like this. Now, if you have any extra fabric, this got off the edge here, you can see, but we're going to end up trimming that away, so it's not really going to matter that much. If you want to trim this, usually I do a better job, but I'm telling you guys, try and sew behind or with the camera in front of you. It's really difficult. So anyway, it's fine. It'll be just fine. So we've got this sewn. I like to give it a quick little press. It just helps it lay a little flatter. And then what we're going to do now is we keep our arch in this same position to the upper right, and we're going to add our next piece, and it's going to go along the bottom, and it's going to look like a little smiley face. So what we're looking at is, once again, to kind of center this with our piece, and we're just overlapping this center bud part of the flower. So we just want to make sure that this part here is a 1/4 inch overlapping this center part, and you're roughly centered on both sides of that bud. And once you get that in place, then you'll just give it a quick top stitch again, about 1/8 of an inch away. Remember, you're going to have to stop and pivot maybe a few times. And if you get a little further than 1/8 of an inch away, as long as you've caught the seam, it really doesn't matter, because once again, this is all freeform piecing, so it's you do not have to be precise on this, and I love it. It's just kind of freeing. So here is the stitch line. You can see what it looks like from the back. This is our seam that we just sewed. So what you can do is, this is excess. We only need a 1/4 of an inch like a normal seam. So I just fold this back and hold it out of the way so I don't accidentally cut it. And then I just trim this away like this, and this will help reduce bulk in the final block. If you want to give it a quick press, you can. I like to keep a small little ironing board next to me so I don't have to get up every 5 seconds to do this. So then here's the important part. You always want to put the piece you just added to the upper right position. And then we're going to add our next piece on. It's going to be like a smiley face. So it goes on the bottom, and you want to center it and also make sure it's overlapping by a 1/4 of an inch. So what I do is I kind of just put my hands on the back where that seam is, and so I know where it is, and then I just feel where this edge is here to know that I'm overlapping it. And then when my fingers are centered already on the piece, then I know it's going to be in the correct position. So this is how we want it to be. It's at the bottom. Our last sewn piece was to the upper right. We got a smiley face. It's centered. We're overlapping all of our pieces underneath by a 1/4 of an inch at least. And then we'll just take it and top stitch. And then we get to the edge and cut. And that's sewn, so we'll just give it a quick press. And then we'll trim away our excess. And like I said, if you pick a color that'll blend a little better, it'll look a little nicer, but I just wanted it to show up for you guys on camera. So you can see this folded under seam allowance that we pressed in. We're going to use that as our cutting guide, because we know that's roughly a 1/4 of an inch. So we just use that to trim our fabric from behind it away so that we get rid of all the excess. And that's how we can, an easy way to know where to trim. And then just fold that back, and we're ready to add our next piece. Now, some people I can already see saying that they don't like this technique because it wastes a lot of fabric. If you go check out Karen Eckmeier's channel, she has tutorials on her happy little villages and they're super, super cute. So if it's something you might be interested in, you could keep these scraps and use them in her village tutorials. It looks pretty fun. Okay, so now it's time to add our last small piece, but you can see there's no more sides of this little bud left. So what we do is make sure our last sewn piece is to the upper right hand position. And now we're gonna start making this triangle shape. So we're gonna add this to the bottom, the next piece like a smiley face like we have been doing before. This is positioned in upper right and we kind of just lay it on sideways. We still want it to be centered, but we're trying to make, you see this? We're lining this edge up with where these intersect and we're gonna make a point like that. And then this side, we widen it as wide as we can get it, but making sure that we're still overlapping here by 1/4 of an inch. So I just pull that down and I have my finger on the top of that seam allowance so I know when I get to the spot where I can't go any further because we still need our seam, our 1/4 inch seam allowance, or roughly 1/4 inch. This is making a point. This is roughly centered. I've got 2 fingers on this side, 2 fingers on this side, and we're making this triangle shape here with the piece below it. So when we get that positioned how we want it, we will just start stitching. Top stitch. Now you can, this is more like a 1/16 of an inch. If you give it a little more wide berth and make it more like an 1/8 of an inch, it gives a cool texture because this is kind of ruffles up. So you don't have to do it as close to the edge as I'm doing, but it's just, like I said, it's hard to see behind the camera. So now we'll trim away this excess behind using this folded under piece as a guide for where to cut, and then we get rid of all that excess, and then we'll give, and it doesn't have to be precise, you can see this is more than 1/4 of an inch, but just you want to get the bulk of it off. Give it a quick little press if you like, just keep sewing, you don't have to. I'm just kind of a control freak, so I can only do, you know, freeform so much. Okay, so that's all of our small pieces. So now we're on to our lightest color of the next size arch. So what we're going to do, once again, the last piece we stitch goes to the upper right, and we're going to add this on like a smiley face, try to center it, and we're adding it at an angle this time. We are making this point up here, right here, and we're overlapping this and making sure this bottom of this folded edge is basically going right to here so that we know we're overlapping by a good 1/4 of an inch. And we've got this triangle shape here. These are centered on either side of this triangle shape. And we know we're good with our seam allowances, so we can start stitching. So like I said, this is a little gentler of a curve, so you may only have to pivot once or twice compared to the sharper inner pieces. And move my hand around. And there's our next piece added on. So we will trim our excess from behind. And give it a quick press. And so it's time to add the next piece. This goes to the upper right. That's the one we just sewed. We hold our next piece at the bottom of where our seam allowance is, so we know where it is, kind of centered as we pinch. I'm lining up this raw edge of this folded under edge with this part right here, because we know that's the shortest side or shortest part, so that we'll have our 1/4 inch seam. And then we scooch this side up so that we have a point right here. And then we just double check it's pretty centered. Looks good. So then we just top stitch it down. So this one I'm doing a little wider so that you can kind of see the difference of what a 1/8 versus a 1/16 looks like. It does give a cool effect. I just don't have a good way to measure 1/8 on this machine, but you can see how it gives like a little ridge. It's kind of cool. So you just trim off the excess once again, give a good press, and you're good to add your next piece. Just make sure you have everything pinched and out of the way so you don't accidentally cut through the good layers when you're trimming this up. And that's that piece. So now it's time to add the next one. This is in the upper right, and you're just going to keep going like this till you're all the way done. So I'm just holding at the bottom of that raw edge at the center, lining it up. Oh, this one's going to get really wide. Look at the difference now. Look how wide this triangle got because of just the way the seam allowance works. So we've got our sharp point here. This is overlapping all of this by 1/4 of an inch at least. We get it positioned and we're about halfway. We could actually scooch it over to the right a little bit more to make it a little more even. And we're good to go. That light pink fabric, I tell you, it just doesn't want to behave. So once again, upper right, and you're just going to keep going like this until you've got 2 of the last pieces left that have the sharp edge. So I'll meet you back here after I get all of the arches done. So once you have just 2 of these outer curve pieces left, you're going to want to pause, press really well. Here's the problem if you do 1/8 of an inch. So it's really cool with this texture, but you got to be careful ironing because I just ironed a little crease in there. So I'm going to go ahead and press that out real quick before this next step. Okay, so once you get to the point where you only have 2 of these outer curves left with the points, you're going to want to stop before you add them on. And before I show you placement, you're going to want to find the template that's called Viewing Window Template. And what this is basically this becomes a way to fussy cut, to know that our rose is going to be large enough before we add the last pieces on. So you're going to print this out. I recommend cutting this out on cardstock so it'll be a little sturdier. And you're going to use an old school X-Acto knife. That's what I recommend because you're going to want to cut this inner square out, and you don't want to go too far beyond the corner points because you're actually using this part of the paper, not this square. This will just be scrap. So what you'll do is just take a ruler, just a regular ruler, or you can use your quilting rulers. Just you want to be careful because you don't want to accidentally cut into it. But I extended these lines past the rectangle so you'll know where to start and stop. But I just hold my ruler along this line and start pushing, and use an old cutting mat for this as well. So you just start right where this line comes out here, and just make sure you go straight along your straight edge, and then you'll see this line. I extended it so that's where you know where to stop. And then yeah, you can see if it didn't go all the way through, then you just line it up and do it one more time. And then there, that way we cut all the way through that time. So you'll just turn it and do the exact same thing. So we line this straight edge up. So we see our lines extending here and there, so we know where to start and stop. And we just press down. Do it another time. That time it went through. I think I was so nervous about cutting a big gouge again. I think I wasn't pressing very hard the first time. And then just keep going all the way around. So remember, just try to be very careful about your starts and stops because we don't want to go beyond those corners. So that time it cut out. Okay. So this is actually scrap now, just trash. And let's put our tip back on for safety purposes. And this is your template. So what we'll do now is bring our rows back over, and this is the piece we just sewed. So now it's time, we're gonna temporarily place these last two pieces on just to make sure that we're gonna have this wide enough to get a 6.5 inch cut square because we want this to finish at 6 inches. So this is a 6.5 inch square, which means our block with seam allowance will finish at 6. Okay, so we're just temporarily putting these on. We're checking our seam allowance down here. This is as wide as we can go with it. And then if we were to add the next piece on, we'd make our point here and overlap about that much. Since this is our last piece, you don't have to really center it as much. I'm just making sure it overlaps here and there to give us a bigger square. We still want our point, so it looks something like that by the time we sewed it. So then we'll take our template and just place it over the top and make sure that you can get a 6.5 inch square trimmed out. If not, you may need to readjust these to make it work, but we can easily cut this a few different ways to get our 6.5 inch. So see this right here, we couldn't cut it like that. If this isn't exactly centered, the center butt, it's okay if it's a little off center, but you just want to make sure, and there's multiple ways we can cut it, and we're going to get our correct size. So now that we know that we're good, we'll just go ahead and stitch these down in place. Okay, so I went ahead and added both of those pieces on. I gave it a really good press with some of my magic spray starch so it lays nice and flat. Here's what it looks like from the back, and you can see it's not a perfect trim, but at least it's removed a lot of that extra fabric, so it's not going to be quite as thick. Your long armor will appreciate it, trust me, I promise. So now we're going to take our template and we're just going to lay it over and position it how we think it looks good. It's subjective. Whatever you think looks good, just remember that you're going to end up having a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you're wanting this to be a sharp point here, you're going to need to move that over a 1/4 inch. So that'll be in your seam allowance, or if you don't want this to be on the edge, and you're going to need to move it further over. So just kind of keep that in mind that you still have a 1/4 inch seam allowance that's going to disappear once you sew this into your finished piece. So I kind of like having these go into the corners, these long pieces. This isn't centered here, and that's okay. So, you just move it around to how you like it. This one came out more wonky than some of my other ones for sure. So I try to get it a little bit centered, but not just perfect either. I think it adds a little fun to it. So if you, okay, this is how I like it. This is how we're going to call it good. If you have a 6.5 inch ruler, a trimming square ruler, I would recommend getting one of these anyways, a 6.5 and a 12.5, just because those are sizes that are consistently used in quilting. I'd get a 6.5 over a 6 inch for sure, because most blocks finish at 6 or 12. If you have one of these, go ahead and just lay it right in the center of that template. You'll lift this up and then you would just trim all around, turn this then and trim all 4 sides. If you do not have one of these, what you're going to do is get your alignment the way that you like, and you're going to take a marking tool and you're just going to mark the corners really well. And then you're also going to mark a few lines along each edge as well. Just try to hold it down really firmly so that nothing shifts on you. And then basically these are just cutting lines we're marking, so that way you'll have good lines to trim along. We'll remove this, and then you can just use a regular square up, a larger square up ruler, or just a straight edge ruler. I think everybody has one of those. So let's see, it's really hard to see on camera, but you're going to be able to see the lines that you marked. So you'll just take your ruler, line it up along all of these lines that you just made, and trim. Then you'll turn your block, do the same thing along here, and trim, and just keep going along all 4 sides, and then you'll have a nice 6.5 inch block that will finish at 6 inches. So there it is. There's our finished block. You can see this is off-centered, offset a little bit, but it just adds to the charm of it, I think. This is going to be the block that you turn in. So this is one block. You can buy a kit from me for $3 for this one. If you bought a 4 colorway kit, then you're gonna have a purple, a pink, a yellow, and a red. And if you piece all 4 of those colors the way I just showed you, you will end up with a block that looks like this. I have just done the exact same thing that I just showed you, but in all 4 colors, sewn them together with a 1/4 inch seam, and I opted to press my seams open. If you happen to be a person who does not like to press seams open, by all means press to one side. But this is the 12-inch finished block. So I wanted to share this 4 colorway block with you, because even though we're going to be turning in a 6-inch block as our block for the month, if you are making a sampler quilt like I am with all of your blocks for the whole year, you'll be able to sew 4 together and put them in your finished quilt, and then that way you'll still be able to add your block from May to your quilt. So I hope you have enjoyed this technique as much as I have. I think it's just a super fun, easy way to piece curves without having to worry about being so precise, and that's why I was recommending even the beginners to try this advanced block this month, just because it's super easy and I think you're gonna love it. So give it a try. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Make sure to go check out Karen Eckmeier's page as well. And thanks for watching and following along. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe for me down there. Hit the subscribe button and then that bell notification button as well, so that you'll be alerted the next time I release a video. Make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It will help me, and please leave me a comment, even if it's just a heart or a smiley face below. It will really help get my video out there for other people to be able to enjoy as well. So thanks for following along, and we will see you next time. Bye.